The Justice Department has launched a civil rights investigation into the arrest of a black student in Columbia, South Carolina. A sheriff's deputy was recorded flipping the student's desk, slamming her to the ground, and dragging her across the room. He has been put on administrative leave. CrimeSiders' Graham Cates is here with me to talk about this. Hey, Graham. Hey. You've been looking into this story. Now, this sheriff's deputy is a resource officer. What do we know about resource officers? I didn't have one in school, so I'm not familiar with who they are, what they do.
Right. School resource officers, though they've been around for like half a century, they really started showing up in classrooms across the country about 20 years ago when the federal government started giving grants to local police departments to make officers available to schools. And the one thing that's difficult to get is what exactly different officers have in terms of training. There are a lot of jurisdictions where it's just a regular cop who happens to be in the school. And there's other places where there are police officers who have kind of learned the nuances of dealing with teenagers, separating the difference between school discipline policy and actually breaking the law. And that's kind of where you see this, the important breakdown of what makes kind of a good school resource officer.
So are they receiving extra training in how to deal with, in some cases, much younger students or kids than they might encounter on their beats?
That's the idea, and that's what the federal government prefers with this kind of thing. But it really does vary from place to place. And the schools themselves don't actually always get say in how a school officer is going to respond to these different issues. I was looking at a Congressional Research Office report from 2013, and they said that research suggests that the presence of school resource officers might result in more children being involved in the criminal justice system for relatively minor offenses. And the idea is that that means that something that might have been handled with a suspension now gets a student sent to, a juvenile detention facility, and that can obviously change the outcome of someone's entire life.
I think, though, and a lot of people who are watching the video and are learning about this story are surprised that for a student who wouldn't get up out of a chair, that you needed an actual law enforcement officer to come in and handle that. I mean, I know that there was somebody besides the teacher that came in after the teacher said that this child was not putting their phone away or something, and came in, and that didn't seem to work. But it seems to me it's not so much to do with the training of the police officers, but perhaps the training and the discipline that goes into the school administration.
Yeah, it's really an important question. I mean, is the school officer supposed to be called just because someone isn't following school rules? And that's one of these things you would think that there's kind of an accepted set of standards on this, but there isn't. It really varies, not even state to state, but town to town, and how they want to handle that.
Yeah, and on the other hand, there is the question of just the child themselves. I mean, when I was growing up, if a teacher said to do something, I'm a rule follower in general, everybody knows that. I would jump, 10 feet and do it. But, to have a police officer approach me in school would have had me, quaking in my boots. But that's another question, too. When a police officer shows up in a disciplinary situation, what authority do they bring to the table to remove a student in the way that they did?
Yeah, I mean, well, they have the ability to act as a police officer, right? They don't necessarily have the ability to, physically manhandle a student, right, because it's just like any other person, but actually, in this case, a minor, right? But there's actually a set of standards that are beginning to get developed about how they're supposed to interact, although they're suggestive, right? The Council on State Governments last year said that police should not be engaged in routine classroom management, and whatever possible should use alternatives to arrest. And obviously the student in this case was arrested for school disciplinary issues. It says school-based officers working with students should be properly selected, trained, supervised, and evaluated. And again, we're not really sure how Officer Fields in this case is evaluated kind of on an annual or day-to-day basis in terms of how he interacts with students.
Interesting. Graham Cates, thanks so much. Remember, you can track investigations and read up on the big crime stories of the day at cbsnews.com/crimesider.